Welcome to the Some Dare Call It Conspiracy podcast, hosted by Brent and Neil Sanders. After nearly 20 years exploring the world of conspiracy culture, we are taking our guests and listeners on a guided tour of the rabbit hole. Our mission? To discover where the truth lies. And welcome to the next episode of Some Dare Call It Conspiracy. I am Brent Lee.
And I'm Neil Sanders.
We wanted to do something a little bit different this time. We've been dealing with some very dark conspiracy theories recently. Always seem to veer into the anti-Semitic tropes or some CSA or just something absolutely terrible. So we thought, hey, let's do something fun. And we asked the audience, what would you like us to do? 236 people across Twitter and Facebook put their votes in. 18% voted for Loch Ness Monster. 22% voted for the Mandela Effect. 23% voted for the Beatle conspiracies. Now, that's a pretty close fight between the bottom.
Not bad, yeah. But I'm convinced we did the Mandela Effect before that.
But with 37% of the vote, the clear winner was, did Stanley Kubrick hoax the moon landing? Were you happy with that choice?
Yeah, it was all right, actually. It gave me an excuse to go and rewatch a load of Stanley Kubrick films. So yeah, cheers for that, audience. Nice one.
Yeah, same. I entertained this one when it came out, so I'm quite pleased that we get to dive into it. But before we do, let's just get straight into this and introduce our guest. And today we are joined by one half of the What Should I Think About podcast, Stephen Mather.
Hello guys, it's great to be here. Thank you for asking me on.
Of course. Now, could you tell our audience a little bit about What Should I Think About podcast? I think that is a pretty good introduction to exactly who you are.
Sure, yeah. So the What Should I Think About podcast is what should I think about ... essentially. And the reason that matters is because basically I grew up in a high control group. I call it a cult. And I only left when I was about 30, around the same time as my daughter was born. So she was indeed the catalyst for me leaving. So the idea behind the podcast is, you know, when you leave a cult or a high control group, you have had everything given to you in terms of what you believe, your philosophy, your beliefs. You have no opinions of your own, you know, apart from perhaps which football team to support. But even then, you know, you're told not to get too involved. So your morals, your philosophy, your beliefs about religion, about science, about absolutely everything really has been kind of spoon-fed to you. So when you leave, you're trying to make sense of a world that you have observed from afar, but you don't know that well. So there's a long period of sense-making, I would call it, where you're trying to make sense of a world and everything in it. And that's what the podcast is about. It's about that journey. I feel like I'm still doing it. I guess we all are to some degree. But it's basically taking lots of different subjects and saying, right, what should we think about this? And it's not up to us to tell our listeners what they should think. That's not the idea. But we just want to, I suppose, model that process a little bit. When people leave a cult, it's very easy for them to get sucked into all sorts of quite fringe ideas, which is why there's some sort of sympathy with this podcast. You know, is you know, it's very easy to get sucked into all sorts of conspiracy ideas and so on. So the idea of the podcast is really just explore that in a rational way, but also with a bit of fun because it's me and my daughter, which is great to be able to talk to my daughter. You know, it's a great excuse to have a chat every week.
Yeah, I love that energy. I love the way you guys play off each other. It's a really fascinating, conversation.
And it's genuine because that we've always talked like that. So that was one of the things that we wanted to do is just you know, replicate that father-daughter dynamic. Because actually you don't see that as often as you perhaps should, I think. Certainly not in the media. So often stories and movies and so on, there's always a difficult relationship between dad and the daughter. But you know, I think it's nice to show that actually you can get on with each other, you know.
Yeah, you have a very friendly and open relationship, and like it seems like there's no power struggle. Not most of these sorts of father-daughter sort of pairings that you might see, I don't know, on YouTube or on podcasts. It's like the daughter is acting like the dad is stupid, And I obviously really related to what you were trying to do there, and that's kind of exactly what we're trying to do here. I've went through the same thing you went through, and I'm making this podcast to find out, what should I think about this conspiracy I used to believe in? What should I think about this conspiracy I used to believe in? But this isn't the only thing you do. You do another podcast called Cults on Film. Can you tell us about that one?
Yeah, of course. So that's quite a new one. There's 4 episodes up, I think, now. And the idea behind this, it's one that I do on my own. It's more of a sort of scripted podcast. But it's really about doing a cult reading, I think, of films. So some of the films that I review are movies about cults, and we've talked about them sometimes on our other podcast, and yet others are not specifically about cults, but there's some cultic element in there that if you do a cult reading, you can actually start to pick up some ideas that actually make some sense. For instance, I've done one about Star Trek and the whole Borg thing, and as an ex-Jehovah's Witness, which is the group that I came from, a lot of the ex-community talk about the JWs as the Borg, because it's this idea that you have to all think alike, you have to say the same things. It's very controlling. So I think looking at a film like Star Trek in that way, you can say, well, actually, there's lots of parallels here between how people get, first of all, recruited into cults, but then the leaving process and what that feels like. There's lots of parallels. So that was one of the ones I really enjoyed doing.
Have you done Eyes Wide Shut yet?
No, that's a good one, isn't it? Obviously, we're going to talk about Kubrick today. So no, I've not done that one, but that's a good one. I did read the book as well a few years ago that it's based upon. Yes, it is a very culty sort of movement that it talks about, isn't it? A very, very strange book. Good one. No, I've not done that one yet.
So what other films have you done?
So the latest one was, I've called it the radicalization of the Skywalkers. So you can actually, if you watch particularly episode 4, which obviously was always bizarre when you first watched it, let's start with episode 4. That's the place to start. So episode 4, A New Hope, I think it's called. If you watch the way that Alec Guinness, Obi-Wan Kenobi character, recruits Luke, if you actually watch that, and I spend quite a bit of time talking about that when he meets him in the desert, he takes him back to his place, and at that point the lies begin and the recruitment starts. Don't get me wrong, I love Star Wars, and I root for the Jedi, of course I do, but actually what he's doing there is kind of classic cult recruitment. He's telling him half-truths, not giving him all the information, appealing to his he's got wanderlust. He's a young lad, basically on a living with his relatives. He's bored. He wants to find excitement, and he's trying to find meaning and purpose in his life. And that is often when cults do recruit young people. That's why they hang around universities and so on, because often young people are in that mode. They've just moved away from their families. They're thinking about what life is all about, perhaps disillusioned by what they've been doing, and this wise old man starts to tell him stories about his father and the adventures that he could have, and a lot of the techniques there are there. And then when we see the sort of other side of that, the Anakin recruitment, actually, if you look at those two side by side, particularly when the Sith Lord, what's his name? Sidious, isn't it? When you see him talking to the young Anakin there, you can see the parallels there. Actually, it's very similar again. You've got the same sorts of things, telling him half-truths, using the fear of losing his the love of his life as the lever. Living forever was actually the thing that I used to try and encourage people when I knocked on people's doors become a Jehovah's Witness because you can live forever in paradise. That was the carrot that we'd wave in front of people. So yeah, it's a very, I think it's very interesting. So that's another one that I've done. The other one that's I think really worth mentioning is there's a film called Apostasy, which is a bit of an indie film, and probably not a lot of your listeners won't have watched that one, but I do recommend it. It's actually a film made by an ex-Jehovah's Witness about the Jehovah's Witness community and a young woman or a family, really, and some of the difficulties they're having. So that's a really interesting one. So that one is explicitly about a group. So yeah, that's the idea of the podcast, and I just need to get myself into gear again because it's hard. Obviously, watching a film takes time. I have to write notes, and I write a script, and then record the script, and then edit it. So there's quite a lot of work involved in that podcast.
That's a really interesting take, actually, the Star Wars one. I've not really thought about it like that. You're dead right. There's a parallel to what Lucas was trying to say. He based the Rebels on the Viet Cong, essentially. So the Empire is supposed to be America. So, yeah, you can totally see how the, for want of a better word, indoctrination, trying to get people involved in a cause. You can debate as to whether the cause is worthy or not. But yeah, that's a really interesting take on it.
Yeah, I mean, you think about the we just kind of accept that the younglings are taken away from their families and raised in an institution. That's we know that because that's where Anakin goes and slaughters the younglings. Well, what are they doing there? They're basically taken away from their families. And that's I understand in the wider context that there are actually Jedi masters who are specifically tasked to go and find gifted children with where the Force is strong with them, and so is that okay? Is that justifiable to basically? I don't know if they kidnap them or however it's done. Sounds it doesn't sound like the best thing to do, does it?
It's like intergalactic Chinese gymnast recruitment.
Yeah, it's very much like that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no wonder Anakin becomes the basket case he becomes. He's dragged away from his mum, and he doesn't get to see her. So yeah, I think there's actually once you start looking, there's more and more, and we're told about the Force, and there's some evidence that this thing actually exists. But some old man said to you, there's this force that pervades the universe, and you can learn to control it. What would we call this? I think we'd call it a dangerous call.
There's certain things you're not going to be able to tell your parents about this training.
Yeah. And the other thing that always makes me laugh is like Obi-Wan goes into this box and says, I've got something for you, Luke. And he pulls out this lightsaber and he says, your father told me to give this to you. And who believes that? Who actually believes that as Anakin, he's fighting Obi-Wan? They're just in a death battle, which we know now happens. What, just before he burns himself half alive, he says, oh, by the way, that lightsaber that's at home, I want you to give that to a son I don't even know I've got yet.
Yeah, it is a bit of a plot hole, isn't it?
Well, it's a lie, isn't it? It's a way for him to drag this young man into a cult, essentially.
That's interesting, actually, thinking of it's not a plot hole at all, it's just a lie.
It's just a lie, yeah. And of course, your father, Darth Vader, murdered your father, is what Obi-Wan tells him. Well, we know that's a lie. And this whole, it was true from a certain point of view, nonsense just doesn't cut it for me. It's just another lie.
Yeah, you know what? You're painting Obi-Wan as far more sinister than I had previously considered, but it works.
Do we have any other recommendations, other films?
Yeah, what films do you like?
Okay, I mean, I love films. I love all sorts of films. What have I watched recently that I really, really liked? I mean, I also love television. I'm really into all the series at the moment. I think television is in a golden age at the moment. So I know it's always nice to criticise, but I think there's so much great telly around. Films, movies. What am I really? Well, strangely, obviously, we're going to talk about Kubrick a bit today, aren't we? But I mean, 2001 has always been one of my favourite films. I absolutely love that film. I have always loved it, even when I watched it as a child. I was the only one in the family that actually liked it. Everybody else was going, "What's that rubbish?" I don't understand that. And I watched it on a black and white television around my granddad and grandma's. So obviously the effects are not going to be there, but I was fascinated by it. Didn't understand it. I'm not sure I still do, but loved it. So I'm a big sci-fi fan. I love that sort of thing. I mean, Dune, I suppose. I'm a great fan of the books. I've read all the books and actually really enjoyed the miniseries that most people forget about, really, because everybody talks about the early movie, which is a bit pants. But the old miniseries, which was 3 series, was actually quite good. And obviously the latest film, the Villeneuve movie, is fabulous, as you would expect from him.
Yeah, I think it's really, really well done.
Yeah, superb. So yeah, that's a big favourite. Arrival, that's another big favourite of mine. Yeah, that's another great movie. I think another one I watch over and over again. So yeah, they're my top I can think of at the moment.
But you, Neil?
My favourite film of all time is called Glengarry Glen Ross. It's a stage play by David Mamet. It's about real estate, or the people that are trying to sell land, like salesmen, basically. It sounds terrible, but it's actually really, really good. And it's worth it just for this one rant that Al Pacino does at the end to Kevin Spacey. So that's my favourite film. I like Taxi Driver a lot. I really, really enjoy Taxi Driver. And Goodfellas and the Godfather series. And this is Spinal Tap. I can sit and watch This is Spinal Tap over and over and over and over again. But I like a lot of films. Like I studied film at uni, so what my friends will tell you is I like bleak films. Anything that's really bleak, that you're going to come away feeling like you've been kicked in the stomach, like so Requiem for a Dream, Last Exit to Brooklyn, or something like that, or Naked, or Nil by Mouth, or The War Zone, like films like that. Like I've watched a few films that my friends have literally walked out of. I'm not watching this anymore. This is disgusting. Like so take of that what you will.
Well, I'm a lot more easily pleased. Like,
what are you into?
I like almost anything. Like if it's a 5 out of 10, I'll give it an 8. I'm like, yeah, man, I enjoyed that. That was fun. Anything I can just eat some popcorn to. But no, my proper favorite films altogether is like The Fall by Tarsem Singh, Interstellar. I absolutely think that is an incredible sci-fi epic. Bronson, about Charlie Bronson.
Yeah.
Kind of dives into his schizophrenic mind. It's so well done. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind as well, another one that I absolutely adore. But my favorite film, The Lego Movie.
I love The Lego Movie.
Oh,
I love The Lego Movie.
It's just fantastic. There's so many layers, but I don't know if I'm doing a room 237 with it and just finding all these different spiritual layers to go with it. But honestly, I think it's this incredible Gnostic, mystic sort of telling of reality. It's incredible.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'd love it.
Are you saying that Lego faked the moon landing? I mean, it's plausible. Like my mate watches the Lego. Not like he's got kids. Like he watches him with his kids. I didn't explain that terribly well. And yeah, he likes it. His kids obviously love it. Apparently, they're supposed to be really good. I haven't actually seen them, any of the Lego films, but apparently they are. There's quite a lot of like quite knowing gags in there and stuff, isn't there?
But it's much deeper than just the knowing gags. I mean, I actually asked for it for Christmas, and one of our friends bought it, and she said to my wife, she said, "Are you sure Stephen wants this?" You know, I don't have kids at home. It's just I heard about it, and I thought, yeah, that sounds really good. I'm a big fan of Mark Kermode as a reviewer and Simon Mayo's show. I listen to that regularly, and they gave it such a great review. I thought, I'm going to watch this. But yeah, it's really about. It's really the heart of it is this idea of, should you stick to the rules or should you wing it? What's the best way to live your life? Is it to be conforming to what the world's society tells us to be like, or actually is the right way to be just strike out on your own and do your own thing and just be creative? And it's that tension between those two things, which is brilliantly done, because of course Lego is like that. Do you buy Lego and then follow the rules and make something that you're told to make, or do you just get creative and make anything or some sort of bizarre monster out of it all? And that's a great idea for a movie.
That is quite zen.
Yeah,
it really is. It's deep, man.
Yeah,
it does somewhat go against like the extortionate prices that you have to pay for Lego. Like, it's we're touching on Buddhist sort of like things here, aren't we? Which is fairly like, I don't know where in the sort of it says £1,000 for a Millennium Falcon, but maybe I've missed that bit.
Because you're supposed to go to a car boot sale and just pick up a box of them and make what you want out of them.
Yeah, no, it's a fair point, actually. That is actually surprisingly clever. I like that.
It's good. You need to watch it. We go to holiday in the same place every year for a few days in North Yorkshire, a little town / village called Pateley Bridge. And they've got a shop there that just sells old Lego. Can you believe it? That's all they sell. It's so cool. So they found a little niche there, just selling old Lego packs. But yeah, when I was growing up, we didn't really do the. You bought little boxes sometimes, but mainly you just bought big boxes of bricks and did your own thing.
Cool. So I'm curious, right? In regards to your previous sort of life, did you ever sort of come across conspiracy theories, or how does that work in an environment like the Jehovah's Witnesses? Would somebody pop up and say, by the way, Paul McCartney's fake, or he crash landed in Roswell in 1947, that sort of thing?
Well, I believe my assertion is that religion in itself, but particularly religion like Jehovah's Witnesses, is actually a conspiracy theory. So if you think about it, so we believed that the whole world is lying in the power of the wicked one, says one of the scriptures we used to read a lot. That's Satan the devil. So Satan the devil is said to be an invisible being who was created but has rebelled against God. And basically he is a supernatural, invisible force that God didn't want him in the heavens, so he threw him down to earth along with his demons, with his mates, and they basically are responsible for all the bad things that are happening. So that's why when Jesus prophesied about wars and earthquakes and famine and stuff, all of that is because Satan, the devil, was thrown down to the earth and he's basically ruling the world. He is considered to be the ruler of the world. Therefore, everything that the world has to offer, and films, television, entertainment of any sort, business, even education, all of that is lying in the hands of the devil, and he's in control of all that stuff. Well, that sounds a lot like a conspiracy theory to me.
What about sort of like the sort of pop culture things? Did any of those ever sort of come into play, or like? I mean, I'm just trying to struggle. Would there ever be a scenario where you've got two Jehovah's Witnesses sat around discussing whether John Lennon was killed by the CIA or not?
Yeah, I think some people would have an interest in that, and so yeah, you were able to explore some of those ideas, like the moon landing, for instance. I remember there was some talk about, whether the moon landing actually happened or not. And I was young at the time when that was first coming out, and so we did talk about that. So I think there is an awareness of pop culture. Jehovah's Witnesses they don't live in a compound somewhere that is completely isolated. So we had TV, we could read books and so on. You're discouraged to do too much of that because, again, the world is lying in the power of the wicked one. So you're discouraged to have too much to do with pop culture, but it does seep in. So you are influenced by it to some degree. So it's something that that JWs would talk about. I think also when you leave, there are quite a lot of ex-witnesses who go down the sort of Illuminati rabbit hole, again, because I think partly because of that. I think there's two things there. One is that they have a suspicion of authority telling them what the truth is, so whenever they hear somebody say, you need to believe this because it's true, I think naturally, if you've grown up in a group where you realize eventually you're being lied to, then you tend to have a suspicion of authority. But I think also, as I mentioned about the way that Jehovah's Witnesses see the world, I feel like that's priming you to accept conspiracy theories later. So when you leave, you're still looking for all these connections to everything that will help it make sense. Actually, the world is chaotic. It has, of course, there are power differentials, there are networks of power, and all of that. I think we can all accept that. But I think what is attractive to it often is this idea that there's somebody behind it all who's pulling the strings. It's not actually chaotic. It's actually being done on purpose. And I think that sits quite well.
Yeah, so you've gone from one sort of like sense where basically the entire world's explained to you because of the doctrine or whatever, the religious texts and that, and then all of a sudden you're sort of cast adrift. So it's attractive to go, right, at least I've got a grasp on this. The Illuminati is running this, the Freemasons do X, and the St. John's Ambulance assassinated or whatever.
I've not heard that one.
Well, they get around. Who would suspect them?
Yeah, I find this very, very interesting, especially with the being the ex-JW, because there's a really famous conspiracist.
Mm-hmm. Who's that then?
Jordan Maxwell.
Was he?
Yes.
Why don't I know that? Really?
He was a Jehovah's Witness. It's something that he doesn't really talk about very often, but there are like 2 interviews where he talks about it.
Oh.
Him and his ex-wife basically were at Jehovah's Witness.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it's very, very interesting. And we spoke before, Stephen, on your podcast, and I've heard like your story and everything. You actually kind of, when you left Jehovah's Witnesses, you did actually kind of go around the rabbit hole a little bit.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think that again for ex-Jehovah's Witnesses they start to look at the history of Jehovah's Witnesses. Jehovah's Witnesses were started by a guy called Charles Taze Russell in the mid 1800s, who there's a fair bit of kind of iconic imagery in some of the literature that can be pointed at and say, oh, look, that looks Masonic, So you do have some of the Masonic sort of symbols. And in fact, when he died, they've literally only recently taken it down. But when he died, Russell was buried, and he had a sort of big pyramid shape. Well, literally a pyramid. Where he was buried. So he was interested, and in fact, he and a lot of the guys who were doing this thinking at the time, these sort of millennialists and Adventist people, they thought that the Great Pyramid of Giza, the measurements in it, all the shaft measurements and all of that was another way to prophesy the end of the world, when the end would happen. So what these guys do is they look at prophecies like in Daniel and Ezekiel and Revelation and so on. And of course, there's lots of numbers in there, lots of imagery, lots of symbolism, and they try and interpret what those mean. And they did all this work in the 1800s, and they calculated that the end of the world would come in, I think this, first of all, they said 1874, something like that. ultimately it was 1914. And then it was 1918, and then it was 1925, and so on and so on. But all of these were based on calculations from the Bible. But Russell thought there was also the same sort of thing going on in the pyramid. So if you measured this shaft and multiplied it by X, carry the one, and before you know it, you've got a prophecy to when Christ is going to return. So Russell was steeped in all of that. He believed all of that. He published that. So when I left, I was actually what I was trying to do was I was trying to prove it to myself that it was true. So that's what I actually did. I wanted to believe it because all my family, all my friends, everybody I knew were Jehovah's Witnesses, and I wanted to stay in that community, but I was struggling to believe it. So I thought, well, I'm going to take some time out and I'm going to really look at this thing in the face and say, right, do I believe this or not? And so when I started to do that, I started to look in different places, and I found a couple of old books in a bookshop written by a guy called Morton Edgar. And it was all about pyramids, and it was all about how the pyramids foretold the end of the times and all of that. And it really echoed some of the stuff that I'd believed in as a Jehovah's Witness. So I started to go down that little bit of a rabbit hole, I think really to try and find another way of proving to myself it was true. Gradually, I started to realize that I really didn't, but I was still interested in this pyramid stuff. So I started to buy a magazine called The Quest for Knowledge magazine. If any of your listeners has any of those old copies, I'd love to see them again. I chucked all mine away at some point, but and I actually wrote a letter in there. It was published, and I've never found it. But I started to get really engaged in all of that. So the Graham Hancock stuff, Fingerprints of the Gods, and obviously the Chariots of the Gods stuff. Robert Bouval and John Anthony West, all these ideas around ancient civilizations who essentially were, I suppose, helping us, telling us things about, I suppose in some respects it's like an echo of the 2001 story, Space Odyssey. In some respects, the idea that our civilization was helped and seeded by another. So I went to a conference down in London where it was all people like me, who were interested, and we were trying to push for the expedition to go underneath one of the pyramids to find the Hall of Records, which was this idea that if we went and found this Hall of Records, we'd have proof of this ancient origins. So yeah, I did get into that, but over time I started to realise that it's a great story. Make a film of it. In fact, they did, Stargate, and great fiction, but there wasn't enough evidence for me. So yeah, I did dabble. I think what saved me was this belief in the scientific method. So whilst it sounded sciencey, and if you watch Ancient Aliens on TV, they often sound sciencey until you say, okay, where's the actual evidence for that? And that's where it starts to fall over, isn't it?
Yeah, I dabbled very hard in all that stuff. Zechariah Sitchin and Eric von Daniken, Graham Hancock. These were some of my favorite authors at some point. Yeah, just love digging into that history, I guess. Awesome. I think we should get into this conspiracy theory then and find out, did Stanley direct the moon landing?
Right. Well, the conspiracy theory is that Stanley Kubrick faked the lunar landing, specifically the Apollo program, the very first Neil Armstrong one. The footage that we've seen, according to the conspiracy theory, is not real, and that goes for the film, that goes for all the photographs. And everything. And the reasons for this will be discussed, but they change. Some people think that basically going to the moon is impossible and there's no way that they could actually do it. Some people think that they did actually go to the moon in one way or another, but that it was impossible to get good photos, or they couldn't actually show what really went on the moon because either aliens or alien technology or something like that. So the main proponent of this theory is a chap called Jay Widener. The first sort of time that he spoke about this, or the first time that he publicised this was actually in 2009. And on his website, he wrote an article called Secrets of the Shining, How Faking the Moon Landing Nearly Cost Stanley Kubrick His Marriage and His Life. And I was listening to an interview with him on High Side Chats the other day, and he claims that basically he'd always sort of been suspicious about this because essentially he knows about the secret space program. And just to explain what the secret space program is, it's advanced technology. Jay thinks that we got it from Nazis who may well have got it from aliens. So, you know, it's a bit of a hand-me-down, but like it's still pretty good, apparently. Now, what he suggests is we've got sort of back-engineered or far greater technology than we would want the public to know. So we've got saucer technology, anti-grav and stuff like that. And basically he says that with his knowledge of this, he was watching The Shining one day, and he actually just sort of came across this theory, suddenly sort of revealed to him the hidden meaning behind this film. And he says in his article, he says, at the time in 1980 when I first saw it, I didn't like it at all. And he's talking about The Shining. The way that Kubrick threw out so much of Stephen King's great source material and replaced it with a lot of things that didn't seem to make any sense. That really bothered me. And so just so everybody knows, what we're talking about is the film The Shining. It's got Jack Nicholson in and Shelley Duvall and Scatman Crothers and various other people. It's the story of a man that goes to a hotel and is essentially driven mad by the ghosts that work there. Or they don't work there. Well, I don't know. Maybe they do.
They've always worked there.
They've always worked there. This is one of the things that the film stubbornly refuses to examine the financial recompense of the ghosts within the Overlook Hotel. But, you know, that's just Kubrick. He was a bit off like that. So anyway, it's a Stephen King novel originally, and Kubrick adapted it for film, but he changed quite a few things. And this is one of the things that sort of first alerted Widener to his idea that there might be something going on under the surface of the film, a hidden message that Kubrick is trying to convey. And he says, hopefully before I'm finished with this essay, the reader will see it is only when Kubrick dramatically alters the script from King's novel that we can begin to understand what Kubrick is trying to tell us in his version of The Shining. Kubrick was only using Stephen King's novel as a launching pad, excuse the pun, to be able to tell a completely different story under the guise of making a film based on a best-selling novel. He did this for a very important reason, mainly to save his life. And he goes on to explain that basically there are two main characters in the film, Jack Torrance and his son Danny. Jack and Danny are representative of two aspects of Kubrick himself. Jack is the practical, pragmatic guy who wants to be a great artist, and he's apparently willing to do anything to accomplish his goal. Jack, like Stanley Kubrick, has black hair. He is idiosyncratic, and he even smokes the same cigarettes as Kubrick, Marlboros. Danny, who's the son, is the other side of the great director. He's the childlike Kubrick, the real artist. The Danny side of Kubrick is psychic, youthful, and he sees things that no one sees. Danny also has a tendency to tell people things that should be kept quiet. Now, the opening of the film takes place with us witnessing Stanley's pragmatic side, Jack, cutting a deal with the manager of the Overlook Hotel. And this is what happens in the film. He's supposed to look after this hotel, which is left empty during the winter. And he thinks that's great because he wants to write a novel. And so this will give him plenty of time to just sit around and write his book. Now, he says that the manager of the Overlook Hotel is wearing red, white and blue. Jack's wife, Wendy, and the son, Danny, also wear red, white and blue for almost the entire film. And in this symbolic interpretation, the Overlook Hotel is America. It was built on the graves of Indians. Even when walking on the floor of the Overlook, one finds oneself trampling over various Native American symbols. And this is true. Like in the story, it's built on on a Native American grave site. And it's kind of suggested that maybe this might be part of the sort of mysterious, supernatural, almost like the land is cursed, or that they've disrespected the sacred land, and therefore, there's something malevolent that the land wants to get back at them.
Which is a very common horror trope.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not. Isn't there something similar in Pet Sematary? Like there's
Yes.
yeah, and Pet Sematary. That's got one of the best no's in any film ever. Like it's it's quality. Anyway, like America, the Overlook is new, shiny. It is ostentatious, corny, or architecturally boring. So he's saying that we have to understand Kubrick's story from his use of symbols. If a picture is worth 1,000 words, then a symbol is worth 1,000 pictures. Well, that's 1,000,000 words. So that's a lot, isn't it? Like, fair play.
Hyperbole.
Right. So anyway, the manager of the Overlook has an American eagle right behind his head, as if the eagle is the power behind the manager. Not only is the eagle the symbol of America, but also the lunar lander was called the Eagle. To the manager's right is an American flag, and symbolically, the manager is the face of the government. Jack cut his deal with the government to be the caretaker of the Overlook. The manager tells Jack his main job is to prevent the hotel, which remember is America, from appearing like it is decaying. Now, that's a very interesting take. There's also something that Jay's actually left out. When Jack is being interviewed by the manager of the Overlook, he's in a room and there's a window behind him, and you can see this bright sunshine pouring in through, which means that basically, it's directly outside. That window shouldn't be there. Now, what Stanley Kubrick did to create a sense of unease with the viewer is he purposely made the layout of the Overlook Hotel impossible. It was all built in London on a soundstage, and you have doors that go nowhere. You have corridors that don't make any sense. You have people appearing from places that they shouldn't be able to get to. And all sorts of sort of inconsistencies that are on purpose. They're not like a badly designed set. They're there on purpose. So if there's a window, that window shouldn't be there because the office is encased by the rest of the building. So what perhaps could that window be saying? That this window is giving us an artificial look, a window into something that we shouldn't be able to see. Now that's an interpretation that Jay didn't actually use, but I think that's fair. So, Stanley Kubrick, Jack, has cut a deal with America, the Overlook Hotel, to do something, to stop it from decaying. And in exchange for that, he gets creativity, or he gets the chance to write. But Jack is not writing. Instead, he's throwing a tennis ball at the wall of the room where his typewriter is. And on the wall, which is struck by the ball, is the Native American motif that looks suspiciously like a group of rockets about to be launched. Jack throwing a ball at the rockets, arrows, and he points out that arrows are representative of Apollo, who was a god of archery. And so essentially, by throwing the tennis ball at the walls, Jay Widener is saying that this is symbolic of Jack Torrance playing ball with Apollo's arrows. So this is obviously a representation of the Apollo mission that is sort of hidden there. Anyway, so then there's the shot of Danny and Wendy in the maze, and it's an overhead shot, and it shows Jack looking at his wife and son wandering around the maze. And this is apparently, according to Jay, indicative of the bind or the trap, essentially, that he's put his family in due to the deal that he's made with America. What he's saying is that one of the main sort of plot points is that the Overlook Hotel is in winter. It's like, it's surrounded by snow. That's why he's there, to keep the boiler going. So that basically you've got to keep the boiler going so it doesn't freeze, but also you've got to watch it so it doesn't blow up. You can't just leave it. And that's a bit that's actually taken out of the film, but is a main plot point in the book. But apparently, according to Jay, the winter represents the Cold War. And this is further sort of elaborated on by basically saying that there's loads of bears everywhere. There's like a bear rug. There's bears that Danny's sort of seen next to. There's famously a man in a bear costume giving fellatio to another man. So, symbolically, the bears seen throughout the film are representative of the pressure that Russia put on the USA to get to the moon. They had to fake the moon landing and cover up the flying saucer craft that the USA had used since WW2. So, again, this is the point. Like, Jay thinks that we did actually go to the moon, but we used back-engineered alien or Nazi technology that's just incredibly advanced. And they can't reveal that. So they had to fake the moon landing using all this knackered old tech and make it look silly and make it look sort of like, artisan, so to speak, rather than actually show what they could really do, because they're in the Cold War. Now, this is the main bit. When Danny is playing with the cars, and he's that famous shot where you look down on him and he's on the horribly garish carpet, and he's got loads of cars around him, and he stands up and he's got an Apollo 11 knitted jumper. And so what this is representative of is showing the actual launch of Apollo 11. So all the cars around him are supposed to be like around the launch pad, and as he stands up, it's supposed to show the rocket taking off. Where does he go then? Well, he goes straight to room 237, which is where he's been warned to stay away from. Now, in the book, it was room 217, and it was changed to room 237 on purpose by Stanley Kubrick. Now, what Jay says is that the moon is 237,000 miles away. And so Stanley, takes the rocket, the jumper, to room 237, the moon. So room 237 is supposed to be representative of the place where they faked the moon landing. This is the soundstage, apparently, where they faked the moon landing. So the real truth is that the movie is about the deal Kubrick made with America to fake Apollo 11. Danny is the artistic side of Kubrick. Because of the complexity of artistic realization of the manner in which the lunar landing needed to appear, Kubrick needed to trust his artistic side. Room 237 is the fake lunar set. Now, Kubrick told the press that he changed the room from 217 to 237 because the owners of the hotel, which was standing in for the overlook, did not want customers shunning room 217. Therefore, he changed it to a number which is not in the hotel. And this is Jay Widener. So I called the Timberline Hotel in Oregon and I asked for a reservation for room 237. And I was surprised when they said yes. I asked if this was a new part of the building, and I was told that the hotel had always had a room 237. So 237 has always been there. Spooky. Right. So remember that. He says that basically the Timberline Hotel has got room 237 and Stanley Kubrick lied about it. So when in the film, the first time that Jack encounters a ghost, he's in a bar, and it's a barman called Lloyd who tries to basically ply him with drinks. And the inference is that Jack Torrance's character is an alcoholic, maybe even that under the influence of alcohol, he had abused/hurt Danny in a fit of rage. It's implied that he grabbed him and threw him across a room. Now, there is actually a subtext in the film that something far more sinister is going on, but we'll come on to that in a little bit. When he's having drinks with Lloyd, that's symbolic of Stanley, i.e. Jack, selling his soul to the hotel, i.e. America. And this is at the same time that Danny is in room 237 being hurt. So, because 237 is symbolically the lunar set, Jack has to lie to Wendy. Danny didn't get hurt because of Jack. Danny is the side of Stanley that knew of the secret project, and somehow he got into a situation where the hotel or America hurt him. After this, Jack begins to go to hell physically. He's growing an unkempt beard and not combing his hair, as Kubrick was known to do. Now Jack is looking like Stanley Kubrick, especially as he began to appear under the stress of the twin productions, 2001: Space Odyssey and the fake Apollo 11 landings. Early 2001 photos show a youthful and unbearded Kubrick with combed hair looking quite handsome. Photos 4 years later, near the end of production of 2001, show Kubrick was a physical wreck. And so Jay's saying that basically this is symbolic of his own struggle, and it's shown there. One of the main bits of evidence is the all work and no play. Now, if people haven't seen the film, basically Wendy stumbles across Jack's novel that he's been writing for weeks now, and he's got a huge manuscript, and so she's eager to see what he's written. And when she actually goes over and starts flicking through the pages, they are all filled with the phrase "all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy." Now, what Jay Widener says is that all ALL is actually A11. So this is representative of A11, Apollo 11. So Apollo 11 work and no play makes Jack a dull boy, which is Stanley Kubrick. So basically he's putting out a cry for help symbolically hidden in this particular text. And the character of Wendy is apparently Christiana Kubrick, who somehow found out about the fake moon landing. And this is why when Jack comes back and starts threatening Wendy, he says, "Well, this is so typical of you. I made an agreement. I have obligations." And what that is Stanley Kubrick secretly saying that, I've made a deal. I can't back out now. Like, I've agreed to fake the moon landing. And regardless of what you think about it, I have to go through it. Now, Danny uses The Shining then to contact a guy that worked at the hotel called Dick Halloran, who's in Florida. Now, Dick Halloran is played by Scatman Crothers. Florida is where Apollo 11 launched. And so this is, again, symbolic, according to Jay, of a reference to the moon landing. But Halloran basically gets on a plane and goes all the way there, walks into the hotel, and immediately gets hit by Jack with an axe in the chest. So it's the most useless rescue attempt probably in the history of film. It's really, really, really bad. And this doesn't happen in the book. Halloran is not killed in the book, or at least not in that way. So Widener thinks that Kubrick told somebody about the moon and they died. And this is him telling the story of that tragic occurrence that, from him accidentally telling one of his friends. Now, the twins, the famous Grady twins, the two girls in the blue dresses that asked Danny to go and play with them, they're represented as twins in the film, but they're not actually twins in the book. Now, the previous caretaker who Stanley, Jack, is taking over from, went mad and killed his daughters with an axe. Now, Jay believes that this is representative of the previous NASA missions, which were called Gemini. Now, Gemini is obviously represented by twins in astrological signs, and so the twins, according to Jay, is symbolic of the previous Gemini program. There's also some other things that he sees. There's a picture in this essay of 6 crates of 7-Up, the popular drink. Now, Widener says that basically, nothing is in this film by accident. So this 6 crates of 7-Up represents the 7 Apollo missions, 6 of which landed on the moon. So there's 6, but of 7-Up, meaning that 7 went up, but only 6 actually made it to the moon. And that's Jay's take on it in that particular thing. He then, later that year, put out a second expanded sort of essay on this called How Stanley Kubrick Faked the Apollo Moon Landings, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Lies. And that's a reference to Dr. Strangelove, which has the subtitle How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, which is about the atomic bomb. So Wine again, he says that he thinks that we did go to the moon, but we actually went with flying saucer tech. But Kubrick directed the footage that we saw, which was fake. He says that JFK knew of this tech and he was trying to get NASA to release it. And after JFK died, NASA decided to fake going to the moon rather than expose their technology and their advanced sources. And he says that we got it from Nazis. He doesn't say that we got it from aliens, but there is also a prominent sort of theory within sort of back engineering the sort of fields that potentially the Nazis got this advanced tech from aliens, or potentially through sort of certain occult means, because people like Goebbels was into various sort of runic magic and black magic, and they had various sort of symbols like the black sun and stuff like that. Anywho, but the reason that they couldn't reveal this, despite JFK's want to do this, was because of the Cold War and not wanting to reveal it to the Russians. So why did they ask Kubrick? Apparently what happened was he asked to use a B-52. A B-52 is a plane that's used as a bomber, and he wanted to use one of these in Dr. Strangelove, which is, as we say, is about accidentally launching a nuclear weapon that destroys the entire planet. It's comedy, but it is actually very good. And he was refused. He says, no, you can't use this B-52. It's far too new technology. We can't have you using it. And so what he did was he actually recreated one with special effects. And Widener, and it was brilliant. It was absolutely brilliant. He got it down to like the last detail, basically. And what Widener postulates is that someone at NASA watched Dr. Strangelove, saw this, noted Stanley Kubrick's attention to detail and his ability to realistically fake stuff that, he'd done on a really small budget. So they reasoned, well, crikey, if we give him an endless budget, this looks like the guy that would be able to fake the moon landings. But also, and this is important, Widener speculates that not only did they have his skill, but they also had a position to leverage to blackmail Stanley Kubrick. Now, Widener speculates that Kubrick was blackmailed as his younger brother, Raoul Kubrick, was the head of the USA Communist Party. And so that could have been really sort of detrimental to Stanley Kubrick. Also, Widener says that what he actually did it for, though, was exchanged for unlimited budget for 2001: A Space Odyssey and no interference in his film making ever again. And Space Odyssey was a huge budget. It was 10 million at the time. So I think that's about 110 million in today's money. So not to be sniffed at, certainly. 2001 began production in 1964 and it was released in 1968. And the Moon Apollo program, mysteriously and coincidentally, also started in 1964 and the moon landing was in 1969. Now, what Jay Widener points out is that Frederick Ordway was a consultant on 2001 and he also worked for NASA and the Apollo program. So why was Stanley Kubrick having people who are working directly with NASA's Apollo program coming in and advising him on a film? And yes, that's considered very, very suspicious by Widener. There was also a gentleman called Harry Lange, who was also worked for NASA, that was also helping Kubrick on the set as a technical advisor.
Yeah, it's a good question, really. Like, why does he get special treatment over any other directors out there?
It is a good question. It certainly requires an answer. Like, Kubrick wasn't like a brilliantly well-known director at that point. He'd done Spartacus, he'd done Paths of Glory, he'd done a film called The Killing, he'd done Lolita. And he's well respected and stuff like that, but he certainly wasn't considered the genius auteur that he came to be. I mean, you could certainly see the talent, but yeah, that's a very, very fair question. Now, Widener proposes that one of the main techniques that he used to fake the moon landing was something called front screen projection. Now, front screen projection is where basically you angle a camera and you basically shine almost like a movie projection on a backdrop. And this backdrop is made of loads and loads of glass beads. And so it catches the image and it looks like it's behind it. So it gives what's called an artificial scale of depth. So if anyone's seen 2001: A Space Odyssey, in the Dawn of Man section, which is the bit where all the apes find the monolith and learn how to use weapons and fight with a leopard and stuff like that. Only a small part of that was actually the set. The bit where they're on the rocks at the beginning, at the front of the screen, that's actually a soundstage in London. Everything behind them is a projection, is a front screen projection, and it's actually pictures that were taken, I think, in Namibia, but I may have got that wrong. But essentially, they took these photographs, and actually still photographs that are projected behind, and it gives the impression that there's a huge landscape there. Also, what it does is it allows you to have focus in different parts of the thing that wouldn't be easy to achieve in lens, essentially. So it makes the entire scene look far, far grander than it actually is. Now, one that everybody's seen, an example of front screen projection, is in old cop films where they show somebody driving and they've got a fake background. For example, like if you've not seen that, you know, an airplane where they're driving back and there's all the silliness that goes on behind them and stuff like that. That's achieved doing front screen projection. The car is stationary, the actual the background is moving, and that's what gives the impression of motion. So why does Widener think this? Well, he says that the depth of focus and the apparent lack of out-of-focus moon pictures shows that it must be a fake background, because they're just too good, the pictures that were taken from the moon. And he's talking about both the films and the film footage, and also the pictures. Now, what he shows, right, is that if you get a pen or anything like that, you can find where the horizon ends. You can look at the moon landing photos, or the pictures that we've seen of them mucking about, and you can actually see where the horizon ends. And then all of a sudden behind that is a completely different texture. And so the background looks like it's been imposed on. And you can do this to a surprising amount of lunar photos. All you need is just take a white pen or whatever, and you can figure out there's a bit where basically there's the foreground is distinct from the background. And particularly if you put the white line over, it really does look like there's something fishy going on.
And if anyone's confused about what we're talking about, go to our Twitter page and you'll see the pictures in a thread.
Or you can go to Jay's actual article, How Stanley Kubrick Faked the Apollo Moon Landings and How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Lies, which will also be linked in there. And he shows various examples of these photographs, which basically have a false horizon. Also, Widener references a gentleman called Richard Hoagland. Now, Richard Hoagland might be familiar to some people. He's the chap that spotted the so-called face on Mars, and also the pyramid structures in Cydonia, which is also a locale in Mars.
Yeah, he's the guy I wrote my letter to.
Oh, yeah.
In the Quest for Knowledge magazine.
Really?
Yeah, and he replied to me with some... he at the end of it, he said, "I'm sorry to have, destroyed your argument," which was quite an arrogant thing to say, because he hadn't at all. But anyway, yeah, carry on.
Fabulous. Well, what Richard Hoagland, as well as the face on Mars and the pyramids on Cydonia, and allegedly, he claims, being one of the first person to suggest that there might be life in the lakes of Europa, which is a moon. He also came up with this idea that basically there are glass structures on the moon, or that the moon is inside some sort of giant dome. How he came up with this is he's got these pictures, and he turned up the contrast, the NASA photos, turned up the contrast, and he saw all these sort of, for want of better expression, like striation marks in the sky, like weird sort of like lines that indicate that there are structures there. So he took it to be that there must be some sort of giant glass dome covering the moon, or some sort of buildings that are right in the background, and NASA's turned down the contrast so that Joe Public doesn't see this. Now, Widener doesn't believe this. He thinks that the photos that Hoagland has got are real, but what it actually shows is stitching in the Scotch light screens that were used to capture the front screen projection. So if you remember, I said that they were all glass beads. Basically, they only came in like quite small bits. And so because Kubrick was doing 2001 on such a massive, massive scale, he had to basically sew a load together to make almost like a quilt of these Scotch light material, which he dangled behind the set and projected something on. But what Widener thinks that he's noticed in the Richard Hoagland pictures is not indication of a glass structure. This is actually the stitching that shows the where the Scotch light is, and it's a compelling argument actually, because you certainly can see these patterns that appear, particularly in the dark portions of these pictures. Widener also basically goes on to say that there's inconsistent shadows. Like that, basically, what he thinks that this shows is multiple light sources on set. He says it must have been done on purpose, almost. He basically gives Kubrick an out because he's saying that Kubrick is kind of a perfectionist, and so he's like, well, why would there be an error? And he's almost sort of suggesting that even at the time, Stanley put like a sort of an Easter egg in there, which is the incongruent shadows, to let those who know that, there's something fishy about this. You really shouldn't take it too seriously. Now, Widener basically says that the president of the MGM had never ever seen a rough cut of 2001, and this is particularly odd. Particularly, as Jay Widener says, as this was the most expensive film of all time. And so what he's saying is that it looks to him, because the CEO didn't see a rough cut, that the film was hidden from everybody until it was actually released. And the reason for this is because of NASA's involvement, and even MGM couldn't be privy to this. Jay goes on. He then made a film in 2011, which is essentially basically these two articles in film form, but there are certain things that he has elaborated on. And this was called Kubrick's Odyssey, and this came out in 2011. And he says that one of the main sort of bits in this particular film is that he says that if you look at all the Apollo 11 footage and you speed it up 150%, it looks like the actors. Freud. It looks like the astronauts. It looks like the astronauts are walking normally or bouncing around like tits, but essentially like, in normal gravity. And so what he thinks has done is essentially they've overcranked it. They've done too much film and then slowed it down by 150% in order to give the impression of weightlessness or 1/6 gravity. And again, that's just quite interesting. Like, it certainly does look strange when you speed it up 150%. It kind of looks weird. Like that, like there's people just mucking about, and then it's been artificially manipulated afterwards. Now, Widener says in the film that he remembers seeing 2001 in the cinema, and that it vividly, it had a thank you to NASA in the credits, which he says has suspiciously since been removed. And this is to hide the connection to NASA. I watched it the other day, and there's certainly no mention of NASA in the credits. Now, room 237 in The Shining, if we remember, that has a key fob on it. And the key fob on it says in capital letters, room, and then it says capital N, small o, to represent number 237. Now, what Widener says is that if you take the letters in room number 237, you can actually alter it to say moon room. The letters in it could be, you have to double sum up. So it doesn't work perfectly, but it wouldn't, would it? Because, that would be giving the game away. It's got to be subtle, Kubrick's life was at stake here, man. Come on. So that is one of the sort of big bits of evidence that Widener says proves it, basically. Like, moon room is showing that 237 is indicative of the moon landing being faked. And when he goes into room 237, he sees a beautiful naked woman, and he kisses her, and she slowly turns into a rotting old woman. And Widener says that this is a metaphor for faking the moon landing, because it seemed like a good idea at the time, like he was going to get something fabulous, and it turned out to be rotten. And I was particularly annoyed by that, because I'd already sort of done that as one that he'd missed in his previous essay, and then he bloody well went and did it in the film, didn't he? So I'm not as clever as I think I am. So when he's trapped in the pantry, Jack is next to some boxes. He's surrounded by food, and he's been trapped there by Wendy Christiana. Now, one of the boxes says Golden Ray. Now, it's spelled Rey, and I don't know what the product is. I think it's vegetable oil. But basically, Golden Ray is representative of the sun. The sun is Apollo. And also, there's a box right next to him that has 39000 on it. And Apollo, which we've seen is represented by the Golden Ray box, was launched from Launch Pad 39. Coincidence? Well, not according to Jay. Now, I think that's a bit like, that's a bit spurious. Well, right next to those two boxes is a box of a drink called Tang. Now, Tang was like an orange drink, and it was a rival to like Coca-Cola and stuff like that. It's not really around anymore. But famously, Tang was one of the drinks that the astronauts took to Apollo. There's a famous bit in The Simpsons where Homer gets drunk and phones up NASA and starts complaining. And one of the things he says is, "Why can't I get no Tang around here?" And for years, I thought that was a reference to Poontang, which would have made that joke a lot more adult. Again, hello, Freud. Anywho, at the end of the film in The Shining, in the ballroom picture, Jack has actually got a note in his hand. And this is true. If you look at it, he's got some sort of like note in his hand. And there's a guy behind him who's sort of reaching over, almost as if he's trying to sort of grab the note out of Jack Nicholson's hand. And Widener says that that's what's in that note. Well, he's just explained it to you, the secret of the moon landing. Now, I could also point out that basically the photo is taken on July the 4th, which is obviously American Independence Day, which is another reference to the Overlook being America. Now, Jay points out that Eyes Wide Shut was released on July the 16th in 1999, which was 30 years to the day of the Apollo launch. He also says that Eyes Wide Shut was essentially the first time that Kubrick was not given this carte blanche. Remember, basically, he did the moon landing for unlimited funds and never to be messed with again. And Jay says that the film was edited by the powers that be because it revealed much about the Illuminati. So, the final bit with Jay Widener, this was actually made into a film. And it's a very interesting film. It's a documentary called Room 237. Like, some people may have seen it. And it looks at different interpretations of The Shining. I believe there's three. One is that it's about the Holocaust. One is about Native American genocide by America, essentially. And then there's Jay Widener's theory that the film is about the moon landing. And essentially, he basically repeats the same sort of arguments that he's put out already in his own film, but it's a documentary. But he does make one claim that is interesting. He says that if you call the Mount Hood Resort, which is the Timberline Hotel, which is where it's in Portland, Oregon, it's where the exteriors for The Shining were filmed. My mate actually lives quite close to it and continually sends me photos of him stood outside it to make me jealous. But if you call the Mount Hood Resort and you ask for room 217, you will find that there is no such room. So that's just not true. The statement is not true. So what? So Stanley was lying. So it's not the reason that he changed the room from 217 to 237. The reason he changed it from 217 to 237 in the film is that 237 represents the moon landing stage where it worked. Now, he's changed his mind here, Jay, because he basically said previously that 217 and 237 both existed. He's now claimed that basically Stanley Kubrick has fabricated this whole story, that 217 doesn't exist. So he's somewhat changed his story, but we'll give him a pass for now, and we'll come back to that in a bit. And the moon, the standard science textbooks say, and they still say, but now with lasers we've got a little better reading, but that the mean distance of the moon from the Earth is exactly 237,000 miles. So he changed this so you would understand that it's the moon ring. So that's basically reiterating that 237 is representative of the distance from the moon to the Earth. But he's changed his explanation as to why Kubrick changed the name. And he goes on to basically discuss his front screen projection idea, that basically the technique that was used in 2001 was very obviously used for the lunar landing photos. And he says that I've had Hollywood SFX people from the 60s and 70s who were front screen projection experts tell me that I've absolutely nailed the Apollo footage as being the result of front screen projection. And I actually listened to Jay on High Side Chats the other day talking about this, and he says that nobody's ever been able to debunk what he said about front screen projection or the Hoagland pictures. He says that no one has ever been able to show a reasonable explanation for what is dangling in the sky, which he says is the Scotch light stitching, and that nobody has ever been able to debunk his front screen projection. And in fact, when people have tried, they've actually ended up supporting his argument and making his argument stronger. So, challenge accepted. The next thing that shocked the interwebs about Stanley Kubrick was a video that turned up on the internet, and it's still widely available. It's called Shooting Kubrick by T. Patrick Murray, and it was filmed in May 1999. This was an interview with Stanley Kubrick in May of 1999, and basically, this guy, T. Patrick Murray, his dad worked with Stanley Kubrick, and so he trusts T. Patrick. I don't know actually what his real name is, but anyway, he's doing this interview, and it's supposedly just about his career and stuff like that. But all of a sudden, Stanley Kubrick says to the chap interviewing him that he wants to tell him the truth. And the truth is that essentially the 1969 moon landing was a fiction, and he filmed it with a budget of $3.2 billion. And he wants to confess this to T. Patrick Murray on the understanding that he doesn't release this interview until 15 years after his death. And I believe... I don't know actually when it did come out, but he may well have stuck to that. But Kubrick in it, he basically says, whilst I was making 2001, I was contacted by people from NASA, and I was blown away by the opportunity to make this film. The moon landing was total fiction with my help. And he says that the reason that he did it was because it was impossible. They tried to go to the moon, and they'd realized that it was just physically impossible. They couldn't actually do it. So in this interview, Kubrick is admitting that not only did he fake the moon landing, but that we've never been able to go to the moon. So not only was the first lunar footage fake, all of it was fake, and we've never, ever been able to go there. He said, I perpetrated a huge fraud on the American public, which I'm now about to detail, involving the USA government and NASA, that the moon landings were all faked, and I was the person that filmed it. And he also goes on to basically say, now this is definitely true, and this is one of the reasons that a lot of people believe that Stanley Kubrick may have faked the moon landing, because he got a lens called a Zeiss 50mm f/0.7. Only 10 of these lenses were ever made, and 6 of them were used on the NASA missions, the Apollo. Now, what these lenses do is they allow for incredibly sharp photography in low light situations. And so they're perfect for the moon, where basically you've sometimes not got great light sources, or you've sometimes got a completely illuminated light source. So it basically gives you the ability to capture images in these extremely extreme circumstances. Now, what Stanley Kubrick actually used these lenses for was in Barry Lyndon, which is a film set during the French Revolution, where he wanted to make it look realistic, and he also wanted to make it look like classical paintings. So he lit everything with candlelight, and the only way that you could capture that scene without it looking completely murky was with these incredible new lenses. But yet again, like we were saying, why did NASA approach this filmmaker and offer to help with 2001? Why is he being given these lenses? And Kubrick basically says in the interview, only 10 were made. They were designed for as a special order from NASA for low light conditions. 1 was kept by Carl Zeiss, who's the maker. 6 were used by NASA. 3 were bought by me. That's it's very interesting. Basically, that is certainly true. The Zeiss lenses were a thing that Kubrick definitely used. So maybe there's something to that. That's literally it. That particular video is out there. It's a 2-camera interview with Stanley Kubrick. And it appeared on the internet. The maker of it has never sort of explained it, really. but it is out there if people want to go and look at it. The next person that we found that was speaking about Kubrick was Bill Cooper. Now, some people may know Bill Cooper. Bill Cooper wrote Behold a Pale Horse, and he's a proponent of many theories. Like originally, he said that he was in the Navy, and he saw a subterranean, or he saw a UFO that basically like went underwater, and he was basically told to cover it up by his superiors. Throughout his career, he sort of changed his opinion many times. I think towards the end of his career, he suggested that aliens weren't real and that it was all a hoax to trick him into telling people about aliens when actually it was advanced military technology. He's also, I think one of the most famous things that Bill Cooper talked about was his theory that the driver, whose name escapes me at the minute, was the actual assassin of JFK. And what he's done is he's slowed down the Zapruder footage, and it seems to show the glint of a gun in the driver's hand, and he turns round, slows down in the car, turns round, seemingly fires this gun at JFK, and then drives off once he realises that JFK is dead. And that was one of Bill Cooper's sort of big things. He eventually sort of died in less than auspicious circumstances. Essentially got into a shootout with local sheriffs on his land. He ended up shooting dead a sheriff, and then he was killed in a gunfight, as far as I'm aware.
That is a common mistake. Sorry, Neil.
No, go ahead.
The agent didn't die. He got shot in the head.
Did he not?
But he didn't die.
Oh.
No.
Oh, right.
And that's where the confusion is. Obviously, because we were told he was shot in the head, we automatically assume that he died. But no, the agent didn't actually die.
Oh.
Thankfully.
I stand corrected, yes. I mean, it can happen. Tupac got shot in the head twice, managed to survive. So, yeah, fair play. He did. Like, fair. Anyway, so Bill Cooper, the long short of it is he feels that 2001, particularly the opening scenes, the Dawn of Man scene and the shots of space, are representative of what he calls mystery religions. And the sort of gist of this is that he believes that the elites, the Illuminati, the people at the top of the pyramid, they all study mystery religions behind, say, Freemasonry and behind even things like sort of Satanism and stuff like that. The sort of the true thing that they're kind of trying to sort of get people towards is mystery religions. And what mystery religions actually means is basically like there were sort of pre-Christian religions that sort of mashed together bits of different things. Some's Egyptian, some's Persian, some's Roman. And basically there were sort of cults that we don't really know a huge amount about that had sort of deity resurrection religions that predate Christianity. And Bill Cooper thinks that these are bad and that the elites secretly worship these mystery religions. And he says, when I first saw the movie 2001, I was amazed, awed to say the least. The entire scope of the movie was overpowering, and for the most of the people in the world was completely baffling. Most people who saw that movie did not understand from beginning to end what it was that they had experienced. But they knew, everyone who saw it knew that they had experienced something profound, that something had been communicated to the dark, deep recesses of their mind, which they did not understand, and indeed, which they were incapable of understanding. For you see, the movie was not meant for the profane, as most of us are called by the adepts or the initiates or the priests of the mystery schools. For that movie was a message to those initiates who were well versed in the symbology and the mystery religion and an ancient religion that is practiced to this day in secret. For it is the story of the entire human race according to the history of mystery religions of ancient Babylon. And so what he's saying is that basically the symbology of the monolith come down and the advancement of human beings ties in directly with mystery religions. It also kind of ties in with the concept of Gnosticism, The idea that basically human beings were imparted knowledge by some entity. I think in Gnosticism they believe it's Lucifer, but they don't think that's a bad thing. They take a different view of it to Christianity. Arthur C. Clarke it is sort of broadly understood that what he was suggesting was this was extraterrestrial, that the monolith is extraterrestrial. But Bill Cooper thinks that potentially there was something different going on here. He says, as the moon begins to come down with the world that was sinking to the lower part of the screen, behind it you saw the emergence of the sun. What you're witnessing was an eclipse of the sun, a partial eclipse. And as the light from the sun spilled across the edge of the moon, it took the shape of a boat, of Isis and the sun. Of course, for anyone who has studied, the Osirian cycle became Osiris, and the symbology was Osiris riding across the heavens upon a boat of Isis. And so what this is saying that basically it ties in with Egyptian sun worship and also Egyptian religions. When you see the partial eclipse of the sun, it makes sort of a crescent shape. That is the boat of Isis. And it is representative of the path that the sun takes during the day before the night comes in. I think Set was the death and also night, and Osiris and Horus was the sun, literally the sun, and Horus was where we get the expression for horizon from. And so it kind of ties in with sort of worshipping the sun as a deity, and that's certainly indicative of the symbolism that is shown with that eclipse. And it's also very, very sort of like interesting that, wow, these ancient people, it does look like a boat. I've never looked at it and gone, oh, it looks like a boat, but these ancient people have manufactured or concocted an entire sort of, narrative around it, which is fascinating. But he says that this signified, of course, the creation of the universe and of the world. And what we saw next was a barren plain, nothing growing, barren rocks, barren desert. And then we saw the sun beginning to rise in the east over the horizon, signifying the birth of the world. Now, the sun travelling across the heavens did not, of course, signify a day. It signified an age. An age, dear listeners. And then we see primitive man in the form of an ape, mingling amongst the animals, neither harming the other, living in a state of innocence. And you saw man only eating plants and roots. And you saw that even when the animals and the man were in competition for food, no one was injured or hurt. But there was a display of waving in arms and yelling and grunting until one or the other moved away. And the significance of this was the age of innocence, when man lived in the Garden of Eden, innocent, with the animals. It was a vegetarian, and the sun progressed farther towards the west. We saw man begin to retreat into, symbolically, the womb, caves, basically. So what he's saying is that basically he's showing kind of the evolution of man, which it is, obviously, but he's saying that there's actually a lot of symbology that could be tied to sort of, I mean, that's Christian, but this is sort of the point that the mystery religion sort of took and picked bits of Christianity, bits of different ones, and sort of kind of molded them together to make their own sort of, religions, which are, as the title suggests, a bit of a mystery. It's basically during the process you saw the rock formation in the shape of the male organ, the penis, which was the symbol of the mystery schools of the generative force of creation. And I'm not sure actually whether he's referring to the monolith there, which I think he is, or just a general rock. If it is, I haven't spotted it. So I'm assuming the monolith.
No, I think he's saying that the monolith represents an obelisk and the obelisk represents a phallus, basically. So he's interchanging it.
No, that's perfectly fair. And then what happened in the movie? Towards the dawn, you heard the humming of bees, millions of bees. And the beehive and bees were a prominent symbol in the mystery schools. It signifies societal cohesion, industry. Not the industry as you may know it in the manufacture of cars, but the industry working together in societal form. And as the sun again began to rise up in the east, signifying the dawn of the new man, the audience beheld an obelisk, a monolith in front of the cave or the womb from which the apes emerged, and it appeared that the humming of the bees was emanating from this block of stone. Now, notice I said three words: monolith, obelisk, and stone, all of which are significant symbols in the mystery religions. And so you watched as the ape milked about in great excitement, and one encouraged by another, signifying Adam and Eve, one encouraging the other to to have the forbidden fruit, until he actually reached out and touched the face of the stone, and he was imparted intellect. Now, most people that I know attributed what happened to some sort of extraterrestrial force, and they were receiving the esoteric interpretation, or that which is meant for the profane, those who were not illuminated and cannot understand what it is they were seeing. But for the initiated, what they witnessed was the creation of the world by God and the impartation of knowledge to man, the forbidden knowledge by Lucifer through his agent Satan. And I'm assuming this is also why the monolith is black, because, Satan loves himself some black get-up. Now, for in the religion of the mystery schools, they believe that man was held prisoner in the Garden of Eden by an unjust and vindictive God, and that man was not told by this unjust and vindictive God that he could have the same powers, and man was actually set free from the bonds of ignorance by Lucifer through his agent Satan. So yeah, again, this is kind of like not dissimilar to Gnosticism, which again, Bill Cooper is a Christian, and so these things are seen as anti-Christian to him and part of the mystery schools, and he strongly believes that the Illuminati is satanic or anti-Christian, and so these are sort of things to be worried about. And you notice that the portrayal of this was absolutely accurate, because the next thing that happened with this new gift, this intellect and this original thought, led to the murder of another human primitive being. And you watch in the symbology of the movie that the murder of Abel by his brother Cain, and you watched as he threw the bone up into the air, and the progression of the use of the gift of intellect led you to a space station spinning around the Earth, and then the story began of man's journey towards illumination. Now, he's actually a bit wrong there, Bill, because it's not a space station, it's a nuclear weapon. And this is a thing that most people don't get about 2001, is to show that a bone is a weapon, and throughout all these millennia of advancement, the best thing that we can come up with is a weapon. So it's a kind of sort of anti-war sentiment that's coming from Kubrick in it. But it makes Cooper's point that essentially it's the symbology of a weapon, and almost through violence is the advancement, the illumination. So to be fair, it still makes his point. But I know that many have been misled along this path and are worshipping the fallen angel that we now know as Lucifer. Many believe that Lucifer and Satan are the same. Many people believe that they are totally different entities, and that Satan is evil and Lucifer is not. But Lucifer rebelled against God, according to the Bible, and was expelled from heaven and flung to the earth to be master of the material world, the master of the earth. So again, that's explaining his particular take on his Christianity, basically. But he says in the movie 2001, the quest led them ultimately into space and then to the moon, where they were further imparted knowledge by Lucifer again in the form of an obelisk, the monolith, the stone, the penis. So yes, it's exactly what you interpreted. He also points out that how, if you progress the letters one forward in the alphabet, H became I, A became B, and L became M. And they're able to see that the symbol was the largest at the time when the movie was made, and the corporation was of the cutting edge of computer technology, IBM. And so what he's saying is he's kind of, again, this is indicative of like AI learning, and he explains it here, how he represented many things. He represented the atomic bomb, the hydrogen bomb, chemical warfare, bacteriological warfare, represented the state of the art of technology, where it became so complicated that no one man could be an expert in it, and thus might unknowingly participate in the building of technology which could destroy him, yet he only worked on one portion of it, which is kind of a reference to the grand plan of the Illuminati and how they're all basically like tricking everybody into ultimately destroying themselves by following Lucifer in Bill's concern. The message was that the new man will go into the future and the rest of us will perish. We will not be allowed into the future. If we are, it will be as a slave in slave labor until we are no longer useful, and then we will simply be exterminated. The message to the vast army of initiates, the mystery school, was that we are on the threshold of the new age. And into this, the new age will march only one man. It is the new man. It is the illuminated man. It is the man that is able to make the evolutionary jump to no more war, to no more rape, to no more pillage, to the level in the mystery schools known as 666. Now, that sounds kind of nice. No more war, no more rape, etc. But in the concept of Bill Cooper, the reason that's happened is because everybody who would oppose the New World Order is dead. So that's why there is no war. So it's not actually quite as as fun as it sounds. But what he's saying is that at the end of the film of 2001, where the aliens essentially keep Bowman in a human zoo and advance him, and they make him evolutionarily advanced to the point where he becomes what is known as a star child, and then he's supposed to go back to Earth and impart knowledge to knock on the next stage of human evolution. And in the original script, that space station that you saw at the beginning, which is actually a nuclear weapon, there's 6 of them. One's American, one's China, one's Russian, I think one's German, and one's French, and then there's another one. And the Star Child actually destroys those to, again, show that basically the evolution of man is to be at peace. But Cooper has interpreted that as a surreptitious nod to the mystery schools, that basically you're not going to be taken along with this. You're going to be on Earth when the illuminated men who go towards the stars, the sun, which is representative of the mystery religions, make that next advancement. So that's Bill Cooper's take on 2001. The final conspiracy that we've got is not really to do with 2001 per se, but it's connected. Because if you remember, Jay Widener basically says that Stanley Kubrick was given carte blanche to do whatever he wanted in exchange for faking the moon landings and keeping his mouth shut about it. He was given carte blanche to do any film project that he wanted and have an unlimited budget, at least on 2001. And this was going hunky-dory for everybody involved until apparently he turned in Eyes Wide Shut, which was his final film. Now, the conspiracy theory, or the theory around it, is that the film shows sex magic rituals. And in the film Eyes Wide Shut, it's about a couple that basically go to a party and they flirt with other guests. They go home, and the wife, played by Nicole Kidman, tells the husband, played by Tom Cruise, that she'd considered having an affair in the past. She'd fantasized about leaving him and her child and running off with this naval officer. And this really throws Tom Cruise out, and he becomes obscenely jealous, and he spends the night wandering around, getting into all sorts of scenarios. He bumps into a prostitute, and he eventually goes and sees his friend who's playing jazz at a bar, and he goes with this friend to a secret cult orgy that is being held at a mansion somewhere, and it's a masked ball in which some sort of ritual is going on. He is exposed, and some woman sacrifices herself to save him. And then basically the rest of the film is about whether this cult actually was involved in it, in the murder of this girl, whether it is actually dangerous, whether he's, whether any of it is real. And it sort of intimates as well that maybe his wife, Nicole Kidman, might be involved in it in some way. But here's the thing. The suggestion was that this is representative of Illuminati. For example, David Icke famously said the orgy scene in Eyes Wide Shut is just the tip of the iceberg. This is exactly the sort of thing, but dialed up to 11, that goes on in Freemasonic halls and Bohemian Grove and various places like that. I forget the exact quote that he said, but he felt that it was really, really revealing. And there are certain other things in it that indicate potentially drugging, mind control. There's some models in it that are flirting outrageously with the Tom Cruise character, and they basically say, they offer him a threesome and basically say, we're going to take you to the end of the rainbow. And they mention the end of the rainbow a couple of times. And according to people that say Fritz Springmeier, they've suggested that rainbows are used in programming for mind control slaves as like sort of a trigger, something that would put them into a hypnotic trance or bring out a certain hypnotically induced personality in them. And there's other rainbows in the film. For example, there's a laundromat that's called Rainbow Laundromats, and in it, the character Village is pimping out his daughter, who also acts in a very sort of hazy, mind-controlled, hypnotic sort of way. So there's a few things like that basically have indicated that there's something deeper going on. Maybe talking about the Illuminati, maybe talking about mind-controlled sex slaves, maybe talking about the elites. And the theory was that Stanley Kubrick was forced to take a huge amount of footage out of Eyes Wide Shut and ultimately was murdered afterwards because it still revealed too much about what the elites get up to. Now, I didn't know. I'd heard this theory loads of times, and I didn't know who started it until doing a bit of digging, we found out. And you'll never guess who started this particular theory. It's our good old friend, Alex Jones. Now, Alex Jones was being interviewed by Sean Stone. Now, Sean Stone is actually Oliver Stone's son. And he had he may well still have it, had a show called The Buzzsaw. And this was in February 2016. Alex Jones, he bumped into Vivian Kubrick. Vivian Kubrick is the daughter of Stanley Kubrick. She actually sort of helped him out doing the soundtrack on Full Metal Jacket. And she worked with him. She lived with him. She was his daughter. And she bumped into Alex Jones at a rally. I forget exactly what the rally was about. I think it was, I don't know. I can't remember. But essentially, they all got beaten up by police there. And this, as often does, led to a friendship forming. So Sean Stone says, you interviewed Vivian Kubrick, Stanley Kubrick's daughter, and his films deal with the power elite, how things are run from the military side, from the space program angle, from paedophilia to mind control. So his final film, Eyes Wide Shut, did she portray it as to this was his insight into sneaking in of how he himself was the Cruise character observing this realm of high magic and sexual ritual? And as I explained, like basically the Tom Cruise character stumbles on this masked orgy where there's some sort of magical ritual going on. And so the suggestion is that maybe this was Kubrick revealing secrets. And Alex Jones says, absolutely. He exposed psychic powers with The Shining. He exposed ritualistic paedophilia, ritualistic sacrifice, ritualistic sex. He exposed humans challenging AI before going to the next stage of development. He exposed interdimensional gates. You name it, the French Revolution, he covered it all. Now, apparently, according to Alex Jones, Vivian Kubrick moved to Texas because she wanted to meet Alex Jones. And after finally sort of bumping into him, apparently, they went to dinner. Yeah, it might be a bit of an ego trip there.
His ego is so big.
Anyway, Alex said, and this isn't just his daughter, this is his protege. She kind of co-directed Full Metal Jacket, but she didn't want the attention. And it's come out that she was the only one of his family that he wanted to associate with at the end. And so what Alex Jones is saying there is that Vivian Kubrick has got the inside track. She was the only person. It implies that Stanley Kubrick disowned the rest of his family, fell out with them, and the only one that he was talking to at the time was Vivian Kubrick. Put a pin in that. We'll come back to that later. Now, Alex says that basically she was the chosen one by Kubrick, and she wanted to come to Austin to tell everything, like reveal absolutely all the secrets. But then, according to Alex, all sorts of weirdness happened. Now, Alex Jones doesn't describe it, but it happened not only to her, but it happened to him. Although he does intimate that there was a psychic attack on the Kubrick family house where a door was ripped off by a poltergeist or some sort of entity. But he doesn't really elaborate on it terribly much. So anyway, but he says, my life changed big time when I met Vivian Kubrick. She filled in a lot of the dots, a lot of the puzzle pieces. She told me the whole 9 yards. Now, I don't want to get killed over this. She didn't give me specifics or names or any of it. But what I can tell you is her father was tortured by what he knew. Most of it was because he was highly psychic. Nobody's ever said that, but I was told this, and actually when you look at it, it's clear. So apparently, according to Alex Jones, Vivian Kubrick told him that her father, Stanley Kubrick, was psychic. He says that basically he exposed the reality of psychic phenomenon and ability in The Shining. And all of a sudden, the CIA and FBI turned up and asked him how he knew about this psychic ability. And AJ says that Kubrick was basically getting stuff right in Dr. Strangelove, down to the actual codes that were used for nuclear attacks. Because in the film, basically, they have to put in a code to release the nuclear bomb. And he says that he got the details of the B-52 bomber and everything absolutely accurate. And again, he exposed psychic ability through this film. And AJ says that was the true secret of Stanley Kubrick. He was putting out psychic visions. I can't really get into it, but she was talking about all the high weirdness. And he says basically the rooms are true. They cut 25 minutes out of Eyes Wide Shut. The system was really mad at him and he wouldn't compromise. Whatever he envisaged in that movie was so dead on that, well, he died. He was murdered. And Sean Stone basically says, so what does that 25 minutes involve? And Alex Jones looks a bit panicked, like he's not really thought about that. And Sean Stone sort of steps in and says, well, I mean, if you're allowed to say, because we don't want to get you killed, Alex, do we? And then basically, for some reason, Alex Jones then tells a story about how he was at a bank in Texas and he was approached by a woman from a defense contractor who he recognized but doesn't name. And she told him that one day he was going to be really, really famous because he tells the truth. And Alex asked this woman, he goes, well, what is it specifically that I've said? And she looked at him knowingly and went, you already know. And then she disappeared off into the night. And then I sort of like just drops in as well that Vivian Kubrick was also a clairvoyant. It sounds far-fetched, but she's obviously inherited this from her father. So, there you go. That's just how it works, apparently.
So Stanley is Jack and the daughter is Danny.
Well, no, the Danny is the artistic side of Stanley Kubrick.
I'm making up my own interpretation now. If everyone gets to make one up, I'm making one up.
No, fair enough. I mean, again, that might not be too far from the truth, to be quite honest. So, what do you think to that, Stephen? Then, are you convinced? Do you think that there's a fair theory going on there?
Just run it by me again.
Well, okay.
Crumbs.
In 2009.
Yeah. I suppose some of the things that you said there, I recognise the sensibility in some of the over interpretation of things that happen. So I think there's some interesting bits that you've talked about there that I would like to go away and do a bit more reading on, a bit more research on.
We've done that for you, so.
Yeah. But I think so a lot of the overinterpretation is what you get in these sorts of ways of thinking about the world. So as you were talking there, it just reminded me a little bit of some of the prophecies that we would use in the Bible. I've already spoken about the kind of time prophecies that we would use to, in inverted commas, prove that the end times were here. And you find yourself going around all sorts of loops. So there's various prophecies. There's one in Daniel that's a dream of Nebuchadnezzar, and there's this big tree that he dreams, and then Daniel gives him the interpretation of this prophecy, but he uses things like 7 times will pass over it, and then we have to know what 7 times is. Well, what are these 7 times? Well, let's look at another part of the Bible that talks about 3.5 times. 3.5 times are equal to 1,260 days. So if we say 7 times, that's twice that. So that's 2,520 days. If we then count, let's have a look at another bit of scripture that talks about a day for a year. If we then, do you know what I mean? So what you're doing, you're saying, how can we interpret this thing that I'm looking at? And at that point, you can kind of take your pick, So in a way, what you said, Brent, at the end there, if everybody gets to have a go, and this is the problem. If okay, well, this is a symbol for that. Okay, well, it could also be a symbol for something else. So where's the evidence for that? How do we decide what it actually does mean? So overinterpretation of events, overinterpretation of even film, I think, is a danger. I mean, it's funny because I went to the Stanley Kubrick exhibition when it was in London a couple of years ago, and got to walk around some of the mock-ups of the sets and things. I sent a picture to Brent of me standing in front of that signs, how to use a zero as a gravity toilet. I sort of posed like our man in it, but it was kind of cool, and so I was really interested in all of that. And what you start to do is you start to watch the films in a very different way, and I'm not saying that Stanley Kubrick didn't fill his films with symbolism and so on. I think, of course, he did, because he wanted you to think about it. There's a lot of misdirection in there, I do believe, as well, to try and make you think there's something there when there isn't, and you get into a habit of doing it. So here's a weird thing that happened to me. So around that time, my daughter had just left university. She did a degree in media and English, and so we started up our little production company at that time called Evil Sheep, which is what we still use as the production company for our podcasts and stuff, and we make films and so on. And we actually did make a little film called Dissonance, and the film, it was kind of, the concept was a psychotherapist who essentially had no qualifications and had managed to scam his way into being a therapist, made a lot of money and become very popular, but his patients absolutely loved him, but he was a fraud. He was a complete fraud. This gets found out and he escapes, or he moves from the country, and then what happens is we interviewed all of his ex-patients, or a lot of his ex-patients, and they kind of improvised the interview. Now, bear in mind, there's me, there's my daughter, and there's another guy that was doing the directing, camera work as well. There's just three of us, and we spent a day in London going around to different people's houses doing these interviews, these mock interviews. So there's not a lot of preparation. We literally turned up with our gear, we sat them in front of the camera, and we did this interview. So unlike a proper film set where you're checking everything, you're making sure the background is absolutely right, you're making sure everything's exactly right, we didn't really have the time. Plus, we were amateurs, we were really just learning. But what started to happen when I was doing the editing afterwards, because I was in this mindset, I started to notice things like there was a particular interview with one of the guys, and there was a painting behind him of a kind of period piece of a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to think, I wonder what that symbolises. And it was me that had filmed it, and I know there was no symbolism in that, but almost you start to see it when it's not there. You think, oh, that could represent this. And, oh, yeah, that kind of represents that. There's some birds, there's some crows in the background. Oh, what does that mean? And you start to see it everywhere. We talked about this on our podcast, this pattern recognition that human beings are so good at. We see it everywhere. We see a face on Mars. We see the man in the moon. And that's not just a visual thing. We look for patterns and we find them everywhere, and we try to make sense of what we're seeing. So I think a lot of what we're hearing there are these efforts to make sense of a complex world through telling a story that kind of knits it all together. Some of the details are really interesting. I'm not sure how I could, I don't know enough to be able to say, well, no, that couldn't have been done that way. But I think it's interesting.
Okay, so that was the Stanley Kubrick moon hoax conspiracy theory, popularized by Jay Weidner. Now, it's time to discover what exactly the truth is in this theory. Please flip the record over to side B for part 2.